Serious developers know the truth. Applications need some sort of instrumentation, so we have the telemetry to know what's happening in front of the user, not just when it's in Visual Studio.
Unfortunately, most developers don't actually put it in.
Most developers do not actually put it in, but fortunately, Microsoft has Application Insights, a key service inside Azure with 3 key changes, and number 5 is going to shock you. Hi and welcome. This is the next episode of Dev Radio. I'm your host, Jerry. I'm here with Darren May.
Hey, Jerry. Great to be here.
Darren May of Custom Made Software.
That's it.
A very clever name you have there. When you're custom making your software, Darren, have you ever added any sort of instrumentation inside your software?
Yeah, I've heard that's a really good idea. Instrumentation, logging, being able to find a root cause of a problem after it's happened. Yeah. I think that's a good idea.
I think a lot of developers put it in at the end when they should be having it during the debug process.
It's kind of a foundational thing that they should be thinking about right from the outset.
Yeah, and I think it's cool to be able to say instrumentation. It's a cool word. So is telemetry. Of course, that's where all the data that's actually coming back, being able to make use of it. I wish we had some sort of service in Azure that could do it.
Yeah, gee, I wonder if we do.
Maybe we do, and maybe it's called Application Insights, and we have Raul back on the show 3.5 years later. Still a PM on the Application Insights, polishing this golden project better and better every time, Raul. Thanks for being back on the show and talking to us again.
Hey, thanks, folks. Glad to be here again. So I'm Rahul, and as Jerry mentioned, I am still a product manager in the Application Insights team. And now the team has grown, and we now have this big product called Azure Monitor that we re-announced a bit at Ignite last week. So this new product is like a full stack monitoring product, which includes Application Insights, log analytics, and a bunch of these services that you might already be using so far.
So this is a big change, because it used to be Application Insights was what you would use maybe in your web service and website and different applications. Now all of a sudden it's a member of a family that covers maybe almost all the needs a developer could come up with to be able to monitor and watch the applications from, I don't know, from bow to stern.
One-stop shop. Sounds
Definitely.
like a good idea.
So Azure Monitor is kind of like a unified product now. So as a developer, you are working on a bunch of applications. Maybe you have some VMs or containers you deploy onto. Maybe you are managing your infrastructure as well. So this is a full stack end-to-end product that you can use to monitor and diagnose and run analytics query throughout your end-to-end apps and infrastructure and get your full insights along the way.
I think a lot of developers have at least a working understanding of Application Insights and being able to add the SDK to one of their applications and be able to collect that sort of telemetry data. What has changed is if I knew Application Insights before, like Ignite, just like, let's say 6 months ago, and I start using Application Insights today, is it still the Application Insights I know?
It's the same product, nothing has changed, and we are continuing to add more and more capabilities and innovations. It's just that it's now part of that unified experience. So you don't have to go to different portals to run your metrics charts or analytics queries or create alerts. It's a unified single experience on the Azure portal where even if you have data coming in from apps or VMs or containers or maybe security and management, everything is in one single place where like you can correlate everything very easily.
So it's more of an enterprise view as opposed to these particular silos.
Depends on the view you want to get. So you want just an application level view, you want a resource group level view, or you want, let's say, using that cliche term, a single pane of glass through your Azure dashboards. You can customize your view accordingly.
I see. So the application dashboard that Application Insights gave me in the past, where I mean, you would get all these beautiful things for free, and all of a sudden you had this incredible dashboard to show to customers, and it's dazzling. That's still part of it, right? I still get that, only you're just saying now I can start adding things that I've never really conveniently been able to add before, being able to monitor the different maybe containers that I'm using or different ancillary kind of services inside of Azure. I can bring all of that into a single view.
Definitely. And what's more is that if you have your applications deployed onto Azure, let's say Azure App Services, you will get a bunch of metrics and diagnostic logs and audit logs and all of these cool stuff automatically out of the box. And once you enable application insights, let's say via the SDK or via an app service extension, you start collecting some specialized information about your requests and user behavior and exceptions. Then you can subsequently drill down into using that same experience that you have been using before Ignite. Everything remains the same. It's just much more polished, much more unified.
So you've got an advantage of having a sort of common schema for this data collection across all of these different services. And so you can have sort of pre-canned reports that are going to drill into all of these things and generate you similar views of all these different types of applications.
Definitely, yeah. We do have...
Wait, I've got to give you credit.
Okay.
I don't think there's a single product in Azure that integrates into Visual Studio and the developer experience so much as Application Insights does. Like, it is crazy. As soon as I add, first of all, just adding Application Insights to a solution is remarkably straightforward, and being able to interact with it right there inside Visual Studio and doing live queries inside Visual Studio, and it shows up in my Solution Explorer. Honestly, I mean this. I don't think there's any product that so seamlessly interacts with the developer like that.
Yeah, and Jerry, I believe last time when we met, I showed you how easy it was to get started from Visual Studio. And we have made a bunch of enhancements to our overall experience. As a developer, let's say you're using Azure App Services. Now you don't even need to go to Visual Studio to get most of your telemetry. You go to your app service, you enable App Insights, and you start collecting your basic telemetry, diagnostics, even some canned heuristics-based reports right there in the app services experience, which you can then start with. Unless you want to collect any custom events and metrics, some custom instrumentation, maybe you don't even need to add the SDK anymore.
So we talked a lot around some of the web services and the items that are hosted in the cloud. What about the rich client story? Is the rich client story still part of Application Insights or Visual Studio App Center and so on? How do those tie together?
So if you have mobile applications, Microsoft's monitoring story is we have a product called Visual Studio App Center, which you can use to collect data from your mobile applications, usage telemetry, crashes, and so on. Now, they have their own experience, which you can use to get a sense of that data. But all of that data can be kind of unified or correlated with your other application insights data. So there is a connector where you can send in your App Center mobile data to App Insights, run the same analytics queries, get the same user behavior analytics experience that App Insights provides for web apps, and get your funnels and cohorts in that same way.
That's right. So that connector makes it so you have a single experience even with your rich client and your mobile applications and things like that.
Single experience in terms of analytics queries and usage insights. So you still have to use App Center experience for crash diagnostics and those other things.
Got it. Okay.
Cool. Well, thanks for clearing them.
Yeah. All right. So this is really this isn't an Azure solution as much as it's really a web and Azure sort of solution. If you really start thinking about it, once you get into Azure, you get so much for free. All right. So Darren's a web developer. He decides he's going to build a website. He decides Application Insights is what he wants, but he takes your first advice and he doesn't even put the SDK in there. He automatically has the ability to see uptime and memory usage and CPU usage on all of the resources that he has inside Azure, right? Because we're hosting it inside Azure, so we already have a lot of this data instrumented for him.
Definitely. So if you have an Azure App Service, you'll automatically get all the platform level metrics and logs like how your app services are performing, what's the overall health, is it even running or not. All of that you get irrespective of App Insights. It's part of the overall Azure Monitor capability. Now, once you need deeper information about exceptions and like bottlenecks, that's where you enable Application Insights.
Got it. So why would he install the SDK in the first place? It would start with getting deeper information around exceptions and things like that. But then he could have things like custom events.
Yes.
Talk to me just a little bit about custom events, because I think this is where a lot of developers start falling in love with Application Insights, because they might use it with a project like the bot framework, where you might look at a workflow of a user where they could go A, B, or C, and you want to be able to just record they did it. So you can, how many people go down B, how many people go down C, and these events give me the ability to be able to add this to the telemetry data. Talk to me a little bit about what you've seen developers use.
So typically, like if you start with application insights, you don't do any kind of custom instrumentation. What you'll get is basic request behavior. If you have a multi-page applications, we can automatically track page views or basic performance data exceptions. Now, to evolve the scenario, let's say you have a single page application, which is how a lot of these applications are today. Now in a single page application, automatically we can only figure out, okay, this is a single page. Every time you click on something, you're still clicking on the single page. Now a developer knows what each of those tabs means, what each of those user flows means. They can, in the code, define something as track this button click as an event or track this tab click as an event. And once they have the data flowing, they can generate some beautiful user flows in aggregate to see where people were flowing from, let's say their home page to their billing page, and what was the funnel like. So using these events, you can actually generate your full user flow diagrams.
And the great thing about that then is, should something go awry, you can determine exactly the path someone went, all the parameters that they were specified as they went through, subject to implementing that sort of event properly in your code. And that gives you the insight into working out what went wrong.
So now I have all these events, and I know I can put custom information inside that event. So if I need to know extra data, I can make sure it's included. Do developers need to worry about storage capacity or anything like that as they start using custom events?
Not necessarily. So the way Application Insights data works is that whatever logs or events or metrics, whatever you are sending, gets aggregated into a single data backend, all of which is stored on our cloud solution. Now, our pricing is completely based on the amount of data that you are sending or storing on our backend. So if you have, let's say, gigabytes of data that you're collecting through events or logs, doesn't really matter. There is no well-defined upper limit that this is the amount you can send. If you're sending too much data, you will have to kind of figure out how your pricing gets impacted accordingly. But you can always implement some kind of sampling or filtering to make sense of it in a significant fashion.
Got it. So if you're writing a custom event on mouse move and you get every point they move, maybe you want to sample that instead of get every single one of them.
Exactly.
Okay,
I actually saw an example previously where there was a basketball game and somebody had instrumented each dribble of the basketball to send some custom event data, and you can imagine what happened.
Okay. So how do you coach developers? How do you coach architects who are starting to use custom events and really starting to use the SDK inside their application, and they don't know how much is enough? Like they're worried that if I start doing too much, maybe storage will be impacted. Is there a rule of thumb or some sort of guideline that you have?
I would say it's like any typical DevOps process where you go through that build, measure, learn cycle. My typical recommendation is don't start with any custom instrumentation. Just enable Application Insights at the SDK or the extension or whatever. See what data you are collecting out of the box. Then you know, based on the questions you are getting, what additionally do you need. And in these days, it's as easy as just adding that line of code, clicking on release management and publishing it in a few seconds or a few minutes. So you could, in a matter of an hour, kind of evolve your monitoring story. So you need to see how people are flowing through your different tabs or clicking on buttons or clicking on any links. Through iterations, you can keep on adding custom events, custom metrics, see what queries you want to write, what diagnostics you want to run. Based on it, you can always continue to iterate.
Okay. If I have custom analysis I need to run against my events to be able to figure things out, do I connect to it as if it's a database, or is the correct approach to export it somehow into, let's say, a warehouse and then run an analysis against it?
Okay, so that's again where the benefit of the unified Azure Monitor solution comes into the picture. We have two data stores available. There is a metrics data store where all of your metrics are stored, like perf counters or requests or exceptions or whatever. Then there is a logs store where all of your raw telemetry is stored, which includes, let's say, your tracing data, your logs, your any kind of raw information or telemetry that you are sending. Now, to run analytics on top of that or queries on top of that, if it's a metrics, you can go to Metrics Explorer, create a few charts, display that on your dashboard, filtering, segmentation, everything, one single experience. If it's a log, let's say you want to run some queries on using log analytics, each data that you're sending from App Insights, not just a particular application. Let's say you have 20 different applications you are managing, and you want to write a query where you want to kind of run something through each of those 20 applications. So you can write that query, get a result, maybe a table or a visualization or even a machine learning algorithm, and kind of take an action what you want based on top of that. So you don't have to export anywhere, no connection, no integration. It's part of the same product, the same log analytics experience where you can run all of these powerful big data analytics queries.
Okay. So even if I needed to run machine learning algorithms against it, I can plug that in just the same, partly because of the way you're storing the data now right there inside Azure.
Yep.
It's just a data store.
Oh,
it's not just a data store, it's more of an analytics engine. So log analytics is like your full big data analytics engine where all of the data is stored in hot storage. You can run analytics queries. Let's say terabytes or petabytes of data, billions of data points. Typically, I have seen like sample queries take not more than single digit seconds. And it's all limited by your creativity, what questions you want to ask.
All right. Well, Application Insights, once again, sounds too good to be true. Maybe it makes sense for you to maybe give us a quick demo.
Definitely.
Okay, I can totally see your screen roll. What am I looking at here?
Okay, so as I said, at Ignite, we unified all of our monitoring solutions into the single product Azure Monitor. So this is a sample dashboard that I have for a set of my applications and infrastructure components that I'm using to run my applications. So I could create and pin charts from various different locations. So this is more of an end-to-end visibility kind of a chart. I'm getting some data from my application side, like how many failures I am getting, what's my availability summary, how's my user behavior pattern looking like. I could see there has been some spikes in my page view load time. Something is taking 3.8 seconds to load, which is horrible. I can come down and see my application map. Application map, it's kind of a full topology view of your applications, including any backend dependencies or client-side calls or any number of different instances you are running, how everything interconnects together. Are there any bottlenecks somewhere? So one of the very full stack tools that you can use to kind of figure out where you want to drill down next. I can even see some data coming in from Azure Security Center, some data coming in from the infrastructure side like service map, containers, network monitoring, VM, SQL, and so on. Now, the thing that we'll want to drill down here, especially from the developer angle, is about our application. So as you can see, there have been some spikes. My server response has been spiking, page view has been spiking. I want to figure out what's going on. But before we do that, considering, let's say we are all new developers on this case, let's open up the application map to see what the application looks like in its entirety. Now, once it opens up, this is a 24 hours view. I can change the time range to, let's say, 7 days or 30 days or whatever I feel comfortable about. So in this case, I can see this particular application has 2 different instances, and there are certain dependencies that it connects to. So there are some SQL databases, there is an Azure table, queue, blob storage. There is another application service that's a dependency. So there is a data access API that I use to call from this particular application. So I can see how many calls have went there, 8 calls in the last 24 hours. But at an aggregate, I can see most of it is healthy. There have been some 4% failures here. And in general, my Azure table has some 67% failures, but more or less it looks fine. So let's go back to our performance view and see why we were seeing some of those failures that we were seeing there. So if I come to performance, I can see my top operations, slowest operations. I can see my slowest dependencies and so on. This is like a typical timestamp time series view. Now I notice here in my slowest operations, some of them took 5 seconds, 4 seconds and so on, but these were like only happening for 2 or 3 times, not that much important to me. Let's click on the home page. 1.3 seconds on average, happens 6,000 times, so pretty significant. Coming on the right-hand side, I can see the full histogram. On an average, as it says, 1.3 seconds, but in the long tail, some events took 5 seconds, 10 seconds, even 48 seconds to execute. So this is certainly something interesting going on here, and I want to get more details. So I can click on samples, look at a particular suggested sample, and see what's happening there. So in this case, this is an end-to-end distributed tracing view. So distributed tracing is one of the best tools to get observability across your application systems. So in this case, it tells me all the different calls or dependency calls or any kind of activities that happened as part of that operation. So maybe a person clicked on a button. So after clicking on that button, what all happened in the backend through the dependencies. Maybe it called another API service, which called another API service, and so on. So it will give me that full distributed stack trace. Now, in this case, I noticed that there have been some calls. Most of it was small, but this particular homepage call that took most amount of its time, I can click on Open Profiler Traces, which will open me a code level analysis of my operation. So code level analysis is where, as a developer, you can drill down into your particular operation, into that ETL trace file, and figure out through that code level view what was taking most amount of its time. Let's pick out a more interesting example where it took 5 seconds or so. So once we do that, once it comes in a few seconds. Okay, so here I can see the entire hot path. It was kind of blocked on a particular user thread start. So I can now download the trace file in Visual Studio, run the full version of Visual Studio Profiler, and figure out, go to that right line of code and figure out what went wrong. So it gives me that full code level analysis view, which I can use to kind of remove my bottlenecks and optimize my application performance. Now, if I am... Yep.
Rahul, but as a developer, how much work would I have had to have done to have enabled this experience to be able to see this level of detail?
So this was just configuration enablement in your app service. So if I did not have it already configured, I came here, Profiler, I click on Profiler, and in this case, it's already enabled, but if it was not, I'll just have to click Enable here, and it would add that extension to my Azure app service.
So really no code?
No code. This is all just enablement through the portal.
Dang.
Yep.
It's awesome.
And if I'm not the developer, let's say this is not my piece of code, I can always file it as a work item through Azure DevOps. So any other of my colleagues who want to diagnose it are welcome to open their bugs and fix it in their slots.
Now, I would imagine that that's the more likely use case, isn't it? You wouldn't have a developer come in here and browse through the performance logs. You'd probably have somebody responsible for that and then assigning that off to the developer.
Yeah, we have seen both those use cases. It completely depends on the team. In some teams, there are IT ops or SRE teams who look at the overall application health, reliability, availability. If they find a particular issue, they file it to a particular developer. In other cases where you have DevOps team doing everything, so in those cases, the developer themselves come to this view, look at their stack traces, and directly jump into Profiler or Debugger to fix that problem then and there. Okay.
That's incredible. Okay.
So this was the performance view. So there is a similar experience when you're trying to like find and fix problems where something might be crashing or your SQL database is not working or your customers are complaining that your page doesn't load anymore. So this is the view you come to. This is our failures experience where, again, you can see your top failing operations. You can see your failing dependencies, any exceptions you're tracking, and so on. Right-hand side, I can see there have been 3 types of response codes I'm getting, 500, 404, 405, and so on. Some different exceptions, 3 dependencies have been failing. Now, this one is interesting. So format exception, this is like my most popular exception. Let's try to diagnose that. I'll click on filter, so it only shows me those exceptions. I can click into a suggested operation like before. and see my distributed trace. So in this case, this operation failed. And there were a bunch of dependency failures in between, but they had a retry logic, so they eventually succeeded. But at the end, there was a backend code failure. So if I get to the failure, I can see a basic call stack, and it says the input string was not in correct format. Now, the interesting thing with this is, unless you know what the input string was, or some of those local variables, it would be kind of difficult to debug and diagnose this problem.
It'd be kind of difficult, yeah.
Yeah, and it's a production environment, so you don't know what your customers entered. They might be doing some SQL hack or something, you'd never know. So with this, I can actually open Debug Snapshot. Now, Debug Snapshot, for those of you who have used Visual Studio Debugger, this is the power of Visual Studio Debugger on Azure portal. You can use Debugger to debug your in-production applications without impacting performance or anything like that. So you can see your full call stack with local variables as if you were doing a local debug session in Visual Studio. So in this case, I knew the input string was not in correct format. I can see my full call stack. I know I was trying to do an int parse 32. And if I go to the next line, it tells me somebody entered an alphanumeric zip code, which int 32 does not parse. So this failed. Now, I know what the problem is. I can go to Visual Studio and fix it. Or if I want to be more lazy, I can open the dump file, which will take me to Visual Studio. I can click on Debug with Managed Only. And this is your standard Visual Studio Debugger experience. It takes me to the line of code where the issue was with all of your like local variables. Now I can do my standard experience here. So this is the product taking you from an aggregate set of exceptions right to the line of code where the problem was. And more interestingly, it's all integrated with CodeLens as well. So as a developer, if your life is in Visual Studio, you don't want to go to Azure Portal or any other monitoring tool, all of your production telemetry stays within Visual Studio. So you can see all of your live exceptions. In this case, this particular piece of code failed 284 times in the last 24 hours. So you can investigate from here, analyze impact, see all those debug logs, and much more.
First thing I'm going to do is open the blame log and see who wrote it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there is change tracking and everything integrated here.
Bro, this is disgusting how awesome it is. Like, this is insane. Having it right there, CodeLens, is beautiful, by the way. Wow. All right, so, and let's just back up to what Darren asked just a second ago, because that's super important. This is not fully instrumented inside the web application. This is just using what's native inside hosting in Azure.
Yeah, so in this case, I did add the SDK. There was no custom instrumentation. There was no lines of code needed. So all I had to do in this case, because I was starting from a new application, I just went to Visual Studio, right-click, and there was a button here on Add Application Insights. So I just had to provide my Azure subscription and the resource group I wanted to start with, and it took care of everything for me. Added the NuGet package, added the lines of configuration required, created a config file for me, made sure everything was auto-configured with everything, and I could then start using it without any problem. So as a next step, if I wanted to add some lines of code, I could do that, but whatever I'm showing you, it's all out of the box.
So as an example, you could have added a custom event where the user was supplying the zip codes, and that could have been logged up there in a different manner. And again, you could have arrived at the same problem by identifying those things, but just a different approach.
Definitely, yeah.
This is pretty amazing.
Wait, and now inside the Application Insights config, when I have my telemetry ID, do I treat my telemetry ID like a subscription ID or a password? Do I want to make sure that doesn't get checked into GitHub, or does it not matter?
So this is kind of how this works in the industry today. It doesn't really matter that much how much security you want to attribute to that, because that particular ID, if you're monitoring your client-side code, especially on the JavaScript HTML side, that would be visible in your client-facing code. If you're not doing client-side monitoring, if you're only doing server-side monitoring, then it all stays within your code. It's all secured as part of your Git repo or team services account and so on. But otherwise, like from a JavaScript perspective, I would suggest need not worry that much.
Okay. What sort of things are done to prevent sort of denial of service attacks or anything along those lines, or people spamming a lot of telemetry to your endpoints using those keys?
That's fair.
Because obviously that being open could be a possibility.
There are possibilities of that, and you could certainly take precautions if you feel you are being attacked that way. So you could maybe change your instrumentation keys every 30 days, or use some kind of redundancy, or even take advantage of some Azure Security Center capabilities to kind of proactively prevent some of that occurring. But there is not something that's provided from within the product to address that today, but that's something we have been hearing from customers and like starting to strongly think about that.
Okay, cool.
Do you see a lot of people building onto Application Insights with their own custom kind of SDK helpers to help certain types of workloads kind of auto-instrument? So I'm creating some sort of project. I could add the Application Insights SDK, but I would also add the extra SDK because I'm writing a web service and it'll track the extra things in MVC, or I'm writing a bot framework application and it tracks the extra things in the bot framework. Do you see people adding on to Application Insights, or is that what maybe your team is doing, some of that?
So we have a fairly expansive ecosystem for App Insights. All of our SDKs are open sourced on GitHub today. So you can go and search for Application Insights in GitHub and you'll find all of our SDKs there. We officially support a subset of these languages, like we do .NET, we do Java, Node, Python, and Go. But there you'll find a bunch of folks from the community have built their own SDKs for different programming languages or different workloads or different scenarios that you could maybe download from GitHub or even create your own and publish there.
Rahul, is there even a language I can choose that doesn't have Application Insights support somehow included?
If it's not already included, you can go to our open source repository and create your own SDK for that.
Fair, yeah. Okay. And even JavaScript on the client side, it has the option to participate and have it as a single view for all my telemetry and insights that you provide.
Definitely. So all your back-end telemetry, front-end telemetry, dependencies, everything is part of your same single application stack.
Crazy.
It's come a long way.
It's come a long way, and boy, is it awesome. Golly, it's awesome. It's amazing what I can get for free, and it's amazing what I can get with such little investment of my developers' time as well. It's just really incredible.
All of this you saw for .NET, but if you are a developer using Java or Node or Python or Go, we recently partnered with Google on this open source project called Open Census that enables us to provide you more powerful distributed tracing capabilities, so you can see all of these different dependencies and visualizations very easily.
Incredible. Honestly, it is. What's next? What's the next big thing for Application Insights? I feel like you've already boiled the ocean.
The next big thing is, of course, to add more and more intelligence capabilities to kind of filter out the noise. So giving you more powerful alerting, smart detection capabilities, so we can proactively identify issues before they start to impact your customers, give you more groups, recommendations, and even, as I said, continue to participate in the open census community. So all of these different programming languages, we want to provide like first-class experience for monitoring and diagnostics through irrespective of the language.
And Application Insights is really a lot more than just instrumentation and being able to store that on the back end. You clearly being able to add these recommendations and be able to find these different pieces inside my telemetry. There's machine learning models and this invasive AI that you've already got put into the product, don't you?
Yep. So if you go to our log analytics engine, there is a bunch of machine learning algorithms as part of that, which can help you do kind of smart diagnostics. It can automatically detect any anomalies that are happening in your user behavior. Maybe somewhere in a particular geography, a particular web page started to behave slow. So rather than you data mining through terabytes of logs, we can identify that anomaly and alert you in near real time.
What do you think, Darren?
I think you're fired.
That's pretty fantastic. Raul, man, every time you're on the show, it's dazzling, and now it's worse than ever. It's just amazing all the things you're able to accomplish so quickly and well. Great job with Application Insights, and man, thank you for coming on the show for this episode.
Glad to hear that. Thanks.
We'll see you again.
Definitely.